Hello, my name is Katarina, and I want to start off my policy pitch by talking about why sleep problems are important. So, sleep problems are related to poor school performance, behavioral problems, and poor physical and mental health, making them a key performance indicator of overall health. I was interested in looking at the relationship between neighborhood level socioeconomic characteristics and their relationship to child sleep outcomes above and beyond the effects of well established risk factors at the child and family level. I was also interested in looking at a child's relative economic position in their neighborhood and if that related to sleep problems. To investigate this, I completed multi-level models on two samples from the 2014 Ontario Child Health Survey. The first sample was of children aged 4 to 11, and the second sample was of youth aged 12 to 17. So firstly, I found high levels of neighborhood poverty were related to sleep problems in children more consistently across age groups than relative economic position. Specifically, children living in areas with higher concentrations of poverty had lower weekday sleep durations, and youth had higher problems staying asleep. Therefore, my first policy recommendation is to target investments in neighborhoods with higher concentrations of poverty to help prevent further health inequities from developing. Across age groups, relative economic position was significant for one sleep outcome. Though future research is needed, the results of my study may suggest that socioeconomic mixing in neighborhoods is beneficial to child sleep. For example, children of low-income families may be benefiting from amenities of the more affluent neighborhoods that they live. Municipal housing policies currently aim to promote socioeconomic mixing in neighborhoods, and my second recommendation is that we continue to invest in policies that emphasize this. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, since Tammy was second last time, she's going to go first this time. So Tammy, if you would.
Okay, hi Katarina. It was a great presentation. Thank you. I really enjoyed seeing the research that you're doing, but it does raise so many, little questions and big questions in this kind of work. So I'm going to ask one of the little questions that I often worry about, and that's the potential bias that comes up in using these reports from the person most knowledgeable about the child, to the extent that, some parents might notice when their kid gets up in the middle of the night a lot more than others. It's not like you have an Apple Watch on all the kids to see how well they're sleeping, right? So I was wondering if you could speak to how much that might matter here.
Yes, that is a great question. That is definitely something to consider when we think about the results of my study. Typically, parents are about 20 minutes off in reporting sleep duration for children, and you're right, there is a difference in some parents who may be more attenuated to the night wakings of children. However, there is some research to show that parents of younger children are better at picking up on these sleep problems than parents of older children or youth, let's say. And for the youth, we actually use their own reported sleep duration and night waking and such.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. So moving on to Claudia.
Hi, thanks very much for this. Enjoyed your presentation. I have a similar question as the first, but I want to focus it more on the neighborhood level measure of poverty. So we know that income in health and all sorts of research is actually often a proxy measure for something else. So I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on your thoughts on what you think that neighborhood level measure of poverty is perhaps actually picking up in relation to reduced sleep?
Great question. This is something that has come up kind of frequently in the literature. Unfortunately, there are very, very few studies on the mechanisms behind why this relationship may be occurring. One of the proposed mechanisms is through stress. So that parents who are living in neighborhoods that are characterized by higher levels of poverty experience stress levels that then trickle down to their kids feeling that stress in the home, which impacts their ability to specifically fall asleep and then also their sleep durations as well. So the main mechanism in the literature currently that's suggested is through stress, but there have also been some other studies such as There was one published quite recently that found that inadequate housing, so housing characterized by needing repairs and low quality housing, was related to higher sleep problems in children specifically. And again, this kind of mechanism is thought to be kind of stress level in the home and how that trickles down to children and youth specifically from their parents being more stressed.
Okay, and Monica?
Thank you very much for your presentation. One of the things in talking about sleep and sleep patterns is nutrition. And I'm wondering if there's data sets that you were missing that would kind of help in furthering that along, and also in rural versus urban settings as well. Just talking a bit further on that, if you've had any opportunity to think about those.
So for nutrition, there has been one study that has looked at this in a US sample, and they proposed one of the reasons that neighborhood level factors are influencing child sleep is through access to grocery stores, because we know that neighborhoods characterized by high levels of poverty have lower access typically to high quality foods. And so they proposed this, and they did find a relationship in their study, but as I said, there's been very few studies on these potential mechanisms. So that could be playing a role here as well. And you mentioned the second part of your question was about rural versus urban. So I actually did include that in my model at the neighborhood level. There has only been one study to investigate this before in a Canadian sample. And they found that children in rural areas had longer sleep durations. And I didn't replicate this finding. I actually found that for children, urban children had higher problems staying asleep, whereas rural children I found they had higher problems falling asleep. So potentially these different areas of living may be operating on different aspects of sleep. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any research for me to give you any more concrete reason to why that might be.
Okay, so Hugh.
Thank you. That was it was an interesting presentation. Having 3 kids of my own, young kids of my own, I appreciate what a routine does for children's sleep habits. And I was wondering, anywhere in the data, not necessarily at the neighborhood level, but maybe at the family level, was there job status? I suspect that someone running 3 part-time jobs, working double time, would have more problematic sleep patterns for the children. Did you see any of that? I don't know if it was in your data set, but did you account for it, or have you seen anything on the literature on that?
There is a little bit of literature on that specifically. Unfortunately, that's not something I included in my model. I don't think it exists in the OAK specifically. As far as the literature goes, there is a wealth of research literature to show specifically parents with shift work who have children with higher levels of sleep problems, but also shorter sleep durations on both weekends and weekdays. And part of the reason why that is thought to be the case is because parents are not available to be there at bedtimes to maintain a consistent routine with their children, which then kind of like leads to sleep problems in these children.
Thank you.
Okay, and just before we turn to Umit, I'm going to remind our audience to get your questions in for Katarina if you have any. Go, take it away, Umit.
Okay, so thanks very much, Katarina. Really, I mean, I gotta admit, like from the beginning, I wasn't really sure like why sleep problems type of thing. I didn't get it from the title, but when I both listened to your video and today, very, very helpful. I can see the significance of the question you're raising and trying to understand, I guess, in terms of determinants, let's say, of some quality child sleep, the way I put it. And maybe it's not a fair kind of thing, but I'm trying to put your story together with Fernando's, the trust and the community, and how the community inclusion, at least the way I see it, and community level trust. So is it just economics, or are there other layers of determinants in the neighborhood level in terms of a child's sleep quality, let's say? And how would that, I mean, I'm not saying for this particular study, but in a future or in the problematic that you're looking at, how would you factor that, you know, again, diversity, inclusion, trust, and intersect that with your research problem? Perhaps you and Fernando, if you were to get together, maybe you could do a study that kind of piggybacks on each other.
Great question. So I actually did include a measure in my model looking at neighborhood levels of antisocial behavior experienced at the neighborhood level by families. Basically what I found for problems staying asleep specifically is that children who lived in neighborhoods characterized by higher levels of antisocial behavior, which was things like break-ins, being verbally assaulted, they had higher problems falling asleep, excuse me. And there is other research. Unfortunately, the literature, everyone has different operationalizations of like the social aspects of neighborhoods that may be relating to sleep. And there is some differing findings there, which make it kind of difficult to understand what specifically in neighborhood social aspects are playing into child sleep. I did find that kind of these more antisocial aspects of neighborhoods was related to children having a hard time falling asleep specifically, and that could be due to stress levels. Like if you're worried about somebody breaking in because that's happened before, you might have a hard time falling asleep in your bed at night. So that's definitely something that has been looked at in the past. And when you asked your question earlier, it kind of made me think about specifically with immigration, how that might be playing into this as well, because it could be that the social makeup of the neighborhood maybe a newly immigrated child is moving into is playing a role in this as well. I imagine that the demographic makeup of that neighborhood could result in some stress for newly immigrated children, depending on the characteristics of that neighborhood. And I would definitely be interested in looking at that in a future study.
Okay, so now we'll turn it back to the panel of judges at large. Does anyone have any follow-up for Katarina or a separate line of questioning?
I have a follow-up. Umit, my brain went there too, is how do we combine these studies? Or I guess my question is, you know, part of feeling comfortable falling asleep is being very aware and or no longer aware of the ambient noise, right? So I get used to, you know, cars going by or, you know, so I thought it was interesting you talked about antisocial behavior. Like, does that mean in the end they're just hearing more, you know, police cars or etc. So I wondered if in your study you were able to or did control for length of time that the child had been living in that area.
I did actually include that, the number of years that the family had been living. Unfortunately, we didn't have specific chat to the child. We just had the family had been living there. And unfortunately, there was no significant results for any of these sleep outcomes for that. However, since finishing this project, I've been discussing with my advisor on potential other things to look at in this data set. And we talked about how maybe that could be a mediator in this relationship between antisocial behavior in a neighborhood and the number of years the child has been exposed to this environment. So I do plan on investigating that in the future if possible, because that could be an avenue by which that relationship changes.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'll make a plug for our justice group that are putting out more statistics at very low geographical levels. So if you want sort of hardcore measures of that kind of, you know, of actual crimes, happy to connect you with those folks.
Thank you.
Okay, so round of virtual applause for Katarina. We now have a sort of 5-minute break and a 5-minute health break. So we're going to reconvene at 1:30. In that time, judges, you put down your thoughts, and then we'll see everyone at 1:30 for Ebenezer's presentation.
Thank you very much.